The sun was warm that afternoon, and the streets of the small town were quiet, except for the occasional hum of a passing car or the soft chatter of people sitting outside the cafe. The air smelled faintly of fresh bread and coffee, a comforting reminder of ordinary life. Walking slowly along the sidewalk was an elderly man, his steps measured and careful, a wooden cane tapping gently against the pavement. His clothes were simple, well worn but neat, and his hair, white and thinning, caught the sunlight, giving him a kind of gentle glow. He moved deliberately, not in a hurry, but as if he had all the time in the world to take in the details of life around him. As he reached the corner near the cafe, something unusual caught his eye. Parked right in front was a luxury car, the kind he had only seen in magazines or on TV. Its paint gleamed like polished glass, reflecting the sunlight and the world around it. The rims were shiny and new, and the engine hummed quietly as a young man leaned against it, scrolling through his phone, a smug smile playing on his face. The car was beautiful, undeniably impressive, and the young man seemed to know it. He straightened his posture as if to say, "Look at what I have. Look at me." The elderly man paused and studied the scene for a moment, not out of envy but curiosity. He noticed how the car seemed almost out of place in this quiet little town, a bold statement of wealth and pride parked among simple, everyday life. He also noticed the people walking by. Some stared, wide-eyed, while others simply shrugged and went about their day. It wasn't just a car. It was an attitude, a message being broadcast silently by its owner. He walked closer, his cane tapping with soft rhythm, and stopped just a few feet from the car. The young man looked up, raising an eyebrow at the elderly figure before him. "Can I help you?" he asked, a trace of amusement in his voice, like he was already assuming this was going to be a strange interaction. The elderly man smiled warmly. "I was just admiring your car," he said softly, his voice gentle and steady. "It's very nice. May I have a look inside?" The young man's amusement turned into laughter, sharp and a little harsh. "Inside, you want to sit in this?" He waved his hand dismissively toward the car. "I don't think you'd even know how to handle it." He chuckled again, clearly enjoying the moment. Around them a few people glanced over, curious about the exchange. But the elderly man didn't get angry. He just nodded slowly, still smiling. "I see," he said simply, turning his gaze toward the street. He could have argued, could have been offended, but he chose calm instead. Something in the way he held himself, quiet and patient, made the young man hesitate for a split second. Then the man shrugged and went back to his phone, clearly uninterested. The elderly man continued his walk, slowly moving past the car and the young man, taking in the sights and sounds of the street. Birds chirped in the nearby trees. A dog barked in the distance, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee drifted from the cafe. He walked as though nothing had happened, but in reality, he had seen enough to understand something about the young man, about the pride, the arrogance, the need to be noticed. As he continued down the street, he thought about his own life. He remembered a time when he too had desired things that made him feel special or important. But over the years he had learned that pride and wealth are temporary, like the shimmer on the car in the sunlight. What lasts is respect, kindness, and understanding. He smiled to himself quietly, not because he felt superior, but because he had learned a truth that many people never take the time to see. The young man, meanwhile, returned his attention to the car, still proud, still confident, but there was something he couldn't quite shake. That quiet, gentle smile of the elderly man, the way he had carried himself without any display of anger or envy, lingered in his mind. It was unusual, unsettling in a way that made him pause for a moment longer than he expected. The elderly man found a bench under a tree and sat down, resting his cane beside him. He watched the people passing by, not with judgment but with interest. Children ran along the sidewalk laughing and chasing each other. A woman pushed a stroller slowly, humming to herself. Life was moving, steady and gentle, and he felt at peace, part of something much bigger than the shine of a car or the need to be admired. As the sun started to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm golden light over the street, he noticed the young man finally get into the car and drive away, engine roaring loudly as if to announce his departure. He didn't feel any bitterness or anger toward him. Instead, he felt a quiet sense of understanding. He knew the young man had a long journey ahead, not in miles but in learning in life. in understanding what truly matters. The elderly man leaned back on the bench and closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the rhythm of the town. Every tap of his cane, every chirp of a bird, every distant sound of laughter reminded him that life was moving, whether people noticed it or not. And sometimes, he thought, a simple walk down the street, a quiet observation, and a calm smile were enough to plant a seed that could grow into something far greater than wealth, pride, or display. He didn't know if the young man would ever remember him. Perhaps he wouldn't, but the elderly man had already done what he intended. He had remained true to himself, patient and kind, and that was enough. As the day slowly turned into evening, he rose from the bench, picked up his cane, and continued walking, the tapping echoing softly down the street, a gentle rhythm in the heart of the town, and somewhere, not too far away, the young man would carry that encounter with him, whether he realized it now or later, as a small, quiet lesson in respect, patience, and humility. A lesson that might someday change him in ways he couldn't yet understand. The next morning, the elderly man woke up with the same calm rhythm that had guided him for years. The town was just beginning to stir. Shopkeepers were opening their doors. A soft breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers from the park, and the occasional car rolled down the streets. He decided to take another walk, not for any particular reason, but simply because walking was a way to observe life, to feel connected to the world around him. As he moved along the familiar streets, he noticed a small crowd gathered near the cafe. Curious, he slowed his pace and leaned on his cane, peering past the people. At the center of it all was the luxury car from yesterday, shining in the sunlight, and leaning casually against it was the same young man. He was talking loudly, clearly trying to impress the crowd, gesturing animatedly with his hands. People around him laughed and nodded at his words, but the elderly man noticed something else. There was a subtle tension in the young man's posture, a hint of nervousness hidden beneath the confidence he projected. The elderly man shook his head slightly and smiled. He had seen this many times before. People often used pride or possessions to cover up uncertainty, to convince themselves and others that they were more important than they really felt. It was a fragile kind of strength, and he could sense it clearly even from a distance. As he approached, the young man finally noticed him. "Oh, it's you again," he said with a smirk, as if the elderly man were some kind of curiosity he hadn't expected to encounter twice. "Are you following me?" His tone was teasing, but there was a sharp edge to it, like he was trying to maintain control of the situation. The elderly man chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, I'm just walking. I like to see how life unfolds," he replied gently. "Your car is very impressive. It must take a lot of care to maintain something so new and beautiful." The young man laughed, a little louder this time. "Care? Sure, it's a car. People like it. That's all that matters." His words were casual, but his eyes flickered with pride. "Do you even know how to drive something like this?" he added, his voice tinged with mockery. The elderly man paused for a moment, thinking. He could have replied sharply, pointing out the arrogance in the young man's voice. But instead he smiled, calm and patient. "Perhaps not," he said quietly, "but I do know how to appreciate it." He gave a small nod and continued walking past the car, letting his presence speak louder than any argument. The young man watched him go, a little longer this time. There was something about the slow, steady way the elderly man moved, the calmness in his eyes that didn't fit with the usual reactions he expected. Most people would either stare in awe or bow to the car's beauty, but this man, he simply observed without judgment or excitement. It was unusual, and it made the young man feel slightly unsettled. Later that day, the young man took his car for a drive around town. He wanted to show it off, to let others admire it, and maybe deep down to prove to himself that he was important. But as he drove, he found himself thinking about the elderly man again. How could someone so old and simple look at a car like that without envy, without desire? There was something different about him, something the young man couldn't quite understand. Meanwhile, the elderly man continued his own quiet routines. He visited the small bookstore he loved, running his fingers over the worn spines of books, reading snippets of poems and stories. He stopped by the market, greeting the vendors with warmth and respect, engaging in small conversations about the weather, about the seasons, about life itself. People smiled at him as he passed, Not because of wealth or status, but because of the kindness and attention he offered to every interaction. It was in these small, everyday actions that the elderly man's strength was visible. It was subtle, almost invisible to those seeking grandeur, but unmistakable to anyone willing to notice. His patience, his calm, and his genuine care for people created an unspoken respect. And somehow word of his demeanor reached the young man, slowly seeping into his thoughts like water wearing away at stone. Days went by, and the young man's encounters with the elderly man continued, small but meaningful. Sometimes he would see him sitting quietly on the bench, sometimes leaning on his cane near the street, watching life pass by. Every time the young man felt a small tug in his chest, a mix of curiosity and unease. He didn't understand it yet, but he knew it was something he couldn't ignore. One afternoon, the young man's car wouldn't start. He turned the key over and over, but the engine remained silent. His confidence faltered as a few bystanders walked past without offering help. Frustration built up inside him, and he leaned against the hood, muttering under his breath. And then, as if on cue, the elderly man appeared, walking with his cane but moving steadily toward him. "Need some help?" he asked, his voice calm, patient, and entirely without judgment. The young man hesitated. There was a strange mixture of pride and embarrassment swirling in him. Maybe," he said finally, unsure of what to expect. The elderly man didn't argue, didn't tease. He simply nodded and approached the car, examining it with careful attention. He opened the hood, checked a few things, and worked quietly, methodically. The young man watched him, fascinated despite himself. There was a precision in his movements, a calm confidence that came not from showiness but from years of experience. For a long moment, the young man remained silent, simply observing. He realized that the elderly man's knowledge, patience, and humility were far more impressive than any car, any display of wealth, or any flashy act. He felt a strange mix of awe and shame, understanding for the first time that there was a different kind of strength in the world, one built on respect, patience, and quiet wisdom rather than arrogance and possessions. By the time the elderly man finished, the car was running perfectly again. The young man's pride had shifted, softened, replaced by an unfamiliar feeling: respect. He looked at the elderly man, not as someone old and fragile, but as someone strong, capable, and wise. He reached out his hand in genuine gratitude, words catching in his throat. "Thank you. I didn't expect this." The elderly man smiled, a warm, knowing smile. "You're welcome," he said simply. "Sometimes we all need a little help to see what really matters." The young man nodded slowly, his mind spinning with thoughts he had never considered before. He realized that for the first time, someone had looked at him without judgment, without envy, without sarcasm, and it made him want to be better, not just for others, but for himself. As the elderly man walked away, cane tapping softly on the pavement, the young man stayed by the car, staring after him. For the first time, he felt a sense of humility, a feeling that perhaps life was bigger than wealth, bigger than pride, bigger than the admiration of strangers. And in that moment, he understood that this simple, quiet man had just given him a lesson far more valuable than any luxury possession ever could. A few days after the car incident, the young man couldn't stop thinking about the elderly man. He had expected to be amused by the quiet old figure, maybe even look down on him. But instead he found himself reflecting on what had happened. There was something different about the man, something that stayed with him long after the engine roared back to life. That morning, the young man decided to take his car out for a short drive. He had been planning to show it off to a few friends, to feel that sense of pride he had grown so used to. But halfway through the drive, the car began to sputter strangely. The engine coughed, a thick smell of smoke drifted through the air, and then, with a final loud groan, the car stopped completely. He tried turning the key again, but nothing happened. Panic rose in his chest. The street was busier than usual, and cars honked impatiently as he struggled to move the car to the side. People walked past, some glancing with mild curiosity, most simply ignoring him. His sense of control, the thing he had always relied on, slipped away with every passing second. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw the familiar figure walking slowly down the sidewalk. The elderly man, cane tapping softly on the pavement, as calm and steady as ever. The young man felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment. Relief that someone he could trust was nearby, and embarrassment that he had once dismissed him so casually. "Looks like you're in a bit of trouble," the elderly man said, his tone gentle but not condescending. The young man rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, the car just stopped. I don't know what to do." His voice sounded smaller than he wanted it to. Pride had been replaced with frustration and worry. The elderly man nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes machines fail just like people. It doesn't mean anything is wrong with you, it just means help is needed." He crouched down slightly, opening the hood carefully and inspecting the engine with calm precision. His hands moved with ease, almost as if he had done this countless times before. The young man stood awkwardly, unsure whether to watch or leave. But curiosity won. He leaned against the side of the car, eyes fixed on the elderly man's steady hands and calm movements. There was no hurry, no judgment, just patience and methodical work. The car, which had seemed impossible to fix, gradually began to respond under the man's guidance. The young man was silent, not just because he was surprised, but because he was starting to realize something about patience, skill, and humility, things that couldn't be bought with money. After a while, the elderly man straightened and wiped his hands on a small cloth he had carried. "Try it now," he said. The young man turned the key, holding his breath, and the engine purred to life, smoother than before. A wave of relief and gratitude washed over him, stronger than he expected. "Wow. It's working," he said quietly, almost in disbelief. The elderly man smiled. "See? Sometimes what seems impossible is just a matter of knowing the right way to approach it, and staying calm while doing so." His eyes held a quiet wisdom, not flashy or loud, but steady and reassuring. The young man looked at him, feeling a strange mix of humility and admiration. I didn't expect this. I thought you'd just laugh at me or tell me I was careless." His voice trailed off, realizing how wrong he had been. The elderly man shook his head gently. "There's no need for judgment. Everyone struggles sometimes. What matters is what you do after that. Do you give up? Do you grow? Or do you just keep proving yourself to others?" The words struck the young man harder than any lecture could have. He thought about all the times he had shown off his car, his wealth, his confidence, thinking that would earn him respect. But this quiet man, with no wealth to flaunt and no need to show off, had just taught him something far more valuable. True respect comes from patience, understanding, and the willingness to help others. For the rest of the afternoon, they worked together to check the car and ensure it was safe to drive. The young man listened, asked questions, and realized he was learning not just about the car, but about life itself. He began to understand that showing off, boasting, or relying on appearances could never replace real skill, patience, or kindness. By the time the car was fully repaired, the sun had begun to dip behind the trees, painting the streets in shades of gold. The young man felt a profound change inside him, a softening of pride and a growing awareness of humility. He looked at the elderly man and said with genuine sincerity, "Thank you, not just for fixing the car, but for everything today." The elderly man's smile was quiet and gentle. "You're welcome," he said. "Remember, every day gives us a chance to choose patience, respect, and understanding. It's not always easy, but it's worth it." The young man nodded slowly, a thought forming in his mind. He realized that this was the kind of lesson that didn't come from books or money or social status. It came from people who had lived, learned, and quietly shared their wisdom. And he understood, perhaps for the first time, that the world was bigger than him, bigger than his car, bigger than the admiration of strangers. As the elderly man began to walk away, cane tapping softly on the pavement, the young man watched him go. For the first time, he didn't feel a need to impress anyone. He didn't feel the rush of pride or the need to boast. Instead, he felt something entirely new: respect, humility, and a quiet desire to be better, not for anyone else, but for himself. That evening, as the young man drove home in his car, he felt a strange lightness, a sense of peace he had never known. The streets looked different, quieter, more meaningful. Every honk, every passerby, every sound seemed to carry a message he hadn't noticed before. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The elderly man had opened a door for him, showing him that life was about more than appearances, more than wealth, more than pride. It was about respect, patience, and understanding, the kind of lessons that truly lasted a lifetime. The following week, the young man found himself thinking about the elderly man more often than he expected. At first it was just a passing thought, like remembering someone you met briefly on the street. But the more he thought it, the more he realized that the man had left a lasting impression. His calm demeanor, his patience, his quiet wisdom, all of it stayed with him even when he tried to focus on other things. That morning, the young man went for a walk in the park, trying to clear his mind. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the sunlight danced on the path, creating a patchwork of light and shadow. He walked slowly, noticing the small details of life around him, the way children laughed as they chased each other, the way birds landed delicately on tree branches, the way the elderly couple sat on benches holding hands. He found himself thinking about how little of this he had noticed before, distracted as he was by appearances, by pride, by the need to be admired. He remembered what the elderly man had said. True respect comes from patience, understanding, and the willingness to help others. The words kept replaying in his mind, gently nudging him toward a new way of thinking. For the first time, he began to wonder what it meant to live like that. To be calm, helpful, and respectful, not for show, but simply because it was the right way to live. Later that day, he saw a group of teenagers struggling to push a broken-down bike along the sidewalk. In the past, he might have walked by, focused on his own plans, proud of his own car and independence. But something inside him had changed. He stopped, took a deep breath, and approached them. "Do you need some help?" he asked, offering a hand. The teenagers glanced at him, surprised, but nodded. Together, they lifted the bike, adjusting the chain and fixing the flat tire. The young man didn't brag, didn't try to impress them. He just worked steadily, patiently, making sure the bike was ready to ride again. As the teenagers rode away, waving and thanking him, the young man felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest. It was not pride like he had felt when driving his luxury car. It was something deeper, a sense of satisfaction, of doing something meaningful for someone else. For the first time, he realized that helping others, even in small ways, carried more weight than showing off wealth or power. That evening, he decided to visit the elderly man. He found him sitting on his usual bench, cane resting beside him, watching the world go by with his calm, steady eyes. "Hello," the young man said, a little hesitantly. I wanted to thank you again. For everything." The elderly man smiled warmly. "You're welcome," he said simply. "But it seems you've started learning without me even saying much." The young man laughed softly, shaking his head. "I didn't realize. I thought I knew what mattered. I thought respect was something people gave you because of what you had. But now I think it's something you earn by how you act." The elderly man nodded. "Exactly. Respect is not a thing to be taken. It's something to be shown every day in how you treat others, and when you do, you find it comes back to you in ways you never expected." The young man listened carefully, absorbing every word. He felt a shift inside him, a change he hadn't felt before. It was subtle but powerful, like the first breeze before a storm, or the first rays of sunlight after a long night. Over the next few days, he continued noticing life differently. When people walked past him, he greeted them with a smile. When someone struggled, he offered a hand without thinking about what it would do for him. He even found himself being more patient with his car, not just caring for it because it was expensive, but because he realized that taking care of things, people, objects, relationships was a form of respect. One afternoon, he returned to the bench where the elderly man often sat. They didn't speak much at first, just watched the street together. But the young man felt a quiet joy in simply being there, learning by observing, absorbing the calmness and patience that seemed to radiate from the older man. Finally, he spoke. "I think I understand something now," he said, his voice soft but confident. "It's not about the car. It's not about how people see me. It's about how I treat others and even myself." The elderly man nodded, his eyes twinkling slightly. "Yes, that is the lesson many never learn. It's simple but not always easy. It takes time, practice, and awareness. But once you understand it, your life changes." The young man smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. The weight of pride, the need to impress, the constant worry about appearances, all of it seemed to lift just a little. For the first time, he felt that he was starting to live, not just exist. That evening, as he walked home, he didn't feel the rush to drive fast or show off. He noticed the small joys, the sound of children playing, the chatter of neighbors, the golden sunlight reflecting off windows. Life felt fuller, more meaningful, because he had started seeing it with new eyes. And deep down he knew that the elderly man had given him something far greater than advice or help with a car. He had shown him a new way to live, one filled with respect, patience, and kindness. Weeks passed, and the young man noticed a change in how he approached life. The small lessons he had learned from the elderly man were slowly becoming habits. He no longer measured his worth by his possessions or the admiration of others. Instead, he began paying attention to people around him, offering help where it was needed and listening more than he spoke. One sunny afternoon, he drove through the town, not with the rush to show off his luxury car, but with a calm awareness of the world around him. He noticed the bakery with a new display of pastries, the children learning to ride bicycles in the park, and the elderly couple walking slowly, hand in hand. Each detail reminded him of the quiet beauty of life that he had ignored for so long. As he passed the bench where the elderly man often sat, he slowed down and parked the car. The man was there, cane resting beside him, eyes following the town with the same calm patience he always carried. The young man stepped out and approached him, a genuine smile on his face. "Hello," he said warmly.
"Mind if I sit with you for a while?"
The elderly man smiled and patted the space beside him. "Of course," he said. "It's good to see you again." They sat together quietly for a few moments, watching the streets, listening to the gentle hum of life. The young man felt a deep sense of peace, a contentment that had nothing to do with wealth or status. He realized that the moments he had once thought were small or insignificant, watching people, helping others, pausing to appreciate life, were actually the moments that mattered most. After a while, the young man spoke. "I wanted to tell you, you've changed the way I see things. I used to think being respected meant having things or showing off. Now I understand it's about how you treat people, how you live your life, and I want to keep learning, not just for me, but for everyone around me." The elderly man's eyes twinkled. "That is a good realization. The world is full of people who think respect can be bought or shown with pride. But true respect comes quietly, through your actions, your patience, and your care for others. Keep that in mind, and your life will always be richer than any luxury car or possession could make it." The young man nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. He thought back to the first time he had seen the elderly man, to the car that had sparked their meeting, to the lessons learned through patience, observation, and quiet guidance. Everything felt connected, like a chain of small events leading to something bigger, his own growth and understanding. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the town, the young man realized he no longer felt the need to impress anyone. The urge to boast about his car, his wealth, or his status had disappeared. In its place was something stronger, a desire to live with integrity, to help others without expecting anything in return, and to carry respect and kindness in everything he did. Before leaving, he turned to the elderly man. "I hope I can be like you someday," he said quietly. "Calm, patient, and respected, not for what I have, but for who I am." The elderly man chuckled softly, leaning on his cane. "You already are on that path. Just remember, it's a journey, not a destination. Keep walking it, and you'll continue to grow every day." The young man smiled, a feeling of gratitude and hope filling his chest. He got into his car, started the engine, and drove slowly down the street, noticing every sound, every person, every small detail around him. The world felt larger, more meaningful, and he knew that life would never feel the same again. From that day forward, he lived differently. He treated people with kindness and patience, valued respect over admiration, and found joy in the simple moments that had once gone unnoticed. The luxury car, once the center of his pride, became just a tool, useful but not defining him. And whenever he passed by the bench where the elderly man sat, he would wave, a silent acknowledgement of the lessons learned and the friendship formed. In the end, the young man understood that the most important lessons in life often come from the simplest sources. An elderly man's wisdom, a quiet act of kindness, or a moment of reflection. He realized that true growth didn't come from wealth or possessions, but from patience, respect, and the willingness to see the world and the people in it with understanding and care. And with that understanding, he walked forward into life with a calm confidence, a quiet joy, and a respect for the world and everyone in it, a lesson learned, remembered, and carried for a lifetime.